Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajmain. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers, sisters, and friends, welcome to our discussion on Riba and welcome to the Riba series. We are now in episode 3, the history of Riba. In this particular episode, we'll be looking at 3 key themes. Number 1, how was Riba practiced and perceived in the previous nations? We'll look at specifically the Abrahamic traditions, so the Banu Israel as well as the Nasara, the Christians and the Jews. How was Riba perceived and what do their books say about Riba? And number 3, we'll look at the economic system and the kind of financing arrangements that took place in Mecca prior to the Messenger of Allah receiving revelation at the age of 40, and just the Meccan environment in general. What was it like when it came to financing and it came to financial practice and financial dealings? So let's zoom in now in terms of the previous nations. What do their scriptures say, right? So if we look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Old Testament is very clear, right, that charging interest is not permitted. So Deuteronomy and other kind of references are there in front of you, where the prohibition of charging interest is clearly there, right? That you can't charge interest. It's interesting. On some, for example, if you look at Exodus, it says, if you lend money to one of my people amongst you who is needy, do not be like a money lender. Charge him no interest. So this idea of, again, exploiting, taking advantage of somebody's need, almost like an illa, a rationale is mentioned there, or like the kind of like reasoning behind what riba does. It commoditizes, exploits people's needs. Yes, there is a discussion in contemporary Jewish law about how interest can be charged to those who are not of the faith, right? But those who are part of the faith, interest cannot be charged to them. The Quran, when you look at this from a Quranic lens, the Quran is absolute in these terms. There is no distinction between people from Banu Israel and people from not Banu Israel. وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ is what the Quran tells us, right? وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ, that they were prohibited from taking riba altogether, right? And it was not permissible for them. So the Quran is very clear and mentions in absolute terms that riba was prohibited. As far as the New Testament is concerned, then there is some kind of, again, indication of this idea of lending with a hope to receive more. And the reference is of Luke, and this is what some scholars mention when it comes to a prohibition in terms of interest, or at least some kind of like disregard for interest when it came to the New Testament. But nevertheless, it's clear that interest was not ordained and was not permitted, and was something definitely discouraged and prohibited for the previous nations. I mean, what we have to understand here is, whatever revelation has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala across time, there are certain things which are constants and certain things which are variables. This is like the fitrah of Allah, like the sunnah of Allah, like the pattern which Allah and the system which Allah has ordained for mankind, right? Inna deena indallah al-Islam, right? If we go with the understanding that really Islam is the program for all of mankind, right? Wherever you may have been, right? But it's really Islam, this kind of idea of submission, this program that Allah has given to us. And the core of this program, there's some constants. They haven't changed at all. So, for example, some acts of worship have been a constant, regardless of which nation you've been part of or which time and space you came in. If you are following revelation, the revelation will always have that constant within it. So one is salah. Every nation had a salah, a prayer, right? Yeah, there might be some kind of like tweaks in what they recited or some of the actions and practices or the timings of prayer, but every nation had this form of prayer. Fasting is another one. Every nation had fasting, right? We know that from the Quran. كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Allah tells us clearly in the Quran that it was also ordained upon those prior to us. Hajj is another one, some kind of pilgrimage. So there have been some kind of universal practices. This is insofar as worship is concerned. What we can understand by reading from the Quran and wider material on riba, how Allah talks about the previous nations, وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ for Banu Israel, and we look at then what the Old Testament says, the New Testament, and even the writings of the scholars, there's an idea that riba is also a constant when it came to charging riba in an economic system. So we have some kind of constant insofar as worship is concerned. We have some constants insofar as mu'amalat are concerned, insofar as dealings with people is concerned. That can be economically, socially, in terms of marital laws, in terms of divorce. There's some constants, because every form of revelation seeks to enhance people. That is the why are they being enhanced? Because that leads to better performance in this world and ultimately success in the hereafter, which is the goal for every human being. So if we want to attain success in the hereafter, we have to live a productive, value-adding, positive life in this world. That value-adding, positive, productive life can only truly be attained and acquired by living according to revelation. And that revelation, the idea and the principles within revelation have to be the same. So Tawheed is another constant, right? Tawheed and the oneness of Allah has been a constant in every single era and generation of revelation has come. So we have some things with belief, some things, even good character. Every single revelation would have called and does call towards good character. Lying has been a constant, prohibited, right? Lying is prohibited, that's a constant. Being good to your neighbors, being good to your parents, being good to your children, being good to your spouse, these are constants. So things with good character are a constant. Some forms of worship have been a constant, they haven't changed. And then economically, riba is another constant. We can understand from what we've read and what we know, that riba has been a constant whenever it's come to developing an economic system. Because it's only with these pillars, when you have a pillar of worship or certain forms of worship and ibadah, constants insofar as character is concerned, and then constants for the economic scene and arena, when all of these different facets and areas of life have some constants which are godly and revealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then can you get a truly prosperous society, and a society which is conducive to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and work for the hereafter. So riba has been a constant in terms of its prohibition. Riba has never ever been, like, from any kind of scriptural thing that we've seen or that we know from the Quran and from the Sharia lens, it's ever been like permitted or given the green light. Okay, riba has never been given the green light in that manner. So we clearly know that even then in the previous generations, interest was prohibited, it was problematic, and we can go as far as saying that it's been a constant from revelation that riba is an economic harm. It has no benefit whatsoever. Now, what about riba in the pre-Islamic era, or in Arabia, before the Messenger of Allah received his prophethood? How was riba perceived, and how was riba practiced? Remember, in that time, many of them were not following any faith. There were some who had followed on the teachings of Ibrahim alayhi salam. They were few and far between. Very few people adhered to the Abrahamic way. Majority of them were stooped in paganism and shirk, and following following their ideas and whims and some kind of like polytheism, right? That's what they were engaged in, engrossed in. So it was an era and a kind of an environment where godly guidance, right, divine guidance, was unspoken of really in that environment, and there was very little to do with revelation. Of course, they believed in Allah, but they also ascribed partners to Allah. So they recognized Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they did shirk. They ascribed partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They gave idols the same kind of ranking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or some of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they affirmed it for other than Allah. So they created equals. That's what shirk means. It's kind of like bringing a partner onto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just as Allah has his asma wa sifat, Allah has his attributes, his qualities, they would affirm these for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so they accepted Allah, but they didn't recognize his oneness. And also when it came to the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there was none. They didn't ascribe to any core guidance which came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what was the kind of like practice in pre-Islamic Arabia? Then a riba-based economic system was prevalent at that time. Riba was the norm. People would be lending with interest, charging interest. That was the kind of practice at that time. It's how financing was done and how credit was supplied. Very typically, this was the way. Yes, the scholars of Seerah, right? The Messenger of Allah was away from any kind of shirk practice. The Messenger of Allah, for all intents and purposes, was on the Abrahamic tradition. And he was amongst those who followed that way. He was away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saved him from anything and everything which was not befitting him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved the Messenger of Allah from all of these things. But even before he received official prophethood at the age of 40, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him. And that's why it's interesting. There is no account of him being involved in riba at all. Rather, there's accounts of him being involved in business part, in musharaka, in mudaraba, in some kind of business partnership. But there is no account of him being involved in riba before him receiving revelation, which is fascinating, right? And so this was a constant of the people who were salim al-taba, and who was of sound nature and reasonable people, right? Though these people who were on the kind of Abrahamic way and Abrahamic path, they had stayed away from riba. But as I mentioned, there were very few. Majority of the people who were in polytheism and away from any kind of divine guidance were engaged in riba and lending with riba. So that was the kind of norm and the atmosphere and environment. And all of the following forms were present in pre-Islamic Arabia. Riba would be stipulated at the outset. So there was lending done with a very clear interest rate attached to the loan. So from the outset, you owe me 1%, or a fixed amount, £500 or 500 dirham dinar. That was very clearly set. The second type of riba that was prevalent was a riba where a fixed amount was payable monthly. So if you received a loan, you are responsible to repay not the principal, but an interest amount every single month as a premium for the loan. Every single month you'll be paying whilst the loan is outstanding, and at the end of the loan, when the loan matured, you'll be responsible to pay the principal as well as the balloon payment of riba. Okay. The third type of riba which was prevalent was that riba where somebody sought extension on a loan. So upon maturity, somebody looked to roll over and seek an extension on the loan. Riba would be charged then as well. That would be when riba would be charged for the extension. So that was a third type of payment received in lieu of lending. So all these, as you can see, are payments which are being made as premiums for loans, whether it's paid at the beginning, whether it's paid in the interim, or whether it's paid at the end. All of them, from a Sharia perspective, are prohibited, because paying a premium for a loan, in whichever way it comes, it's against a loan contract, and a loan contract does not allow any premium whatsoever, stipulated premium whatsoever. So this was the kind of scene. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he mentions, look, when a debt would mature, they would roll it over and compound the interest. The poor and needy would typically be the victims of this. The liabilities on the poor would increase without that additional capital being of any use or benefit to the debtor. And the returns of the lender would increase without his funds being of any benefit to his brother or sister. This I found amazing. In I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, he mentioned this because he talks about how he's kind of alluding to the idea of how the contract of riba and how this kind of loan that you're doing is not really productive for the lender, okay? In the sense that the lender is gaining without his funds being of really any benefit. And the borrower, he's being drowned and being forced to repay this additional capital or this premium now without any additional benefit. So this is talking about specifically the third type of riba, where riba would be paid upon an extension. So what he mentions is the liabilities would increase, because if you are seeking extension, there's a premium that's attached to the extension. So if a person had borrowed £1,000 and he can't pay, upon maturity, £100 charge would be liable. A further £100 premium would be levied on this borrower. So he's not received £100. The extra £100, he's not received it to use it. Rather, it's just a fictitious number that's been attached on him without any kind of productive benefit, right? He's not had the ability to use the £100. Likewise, that lender, he's not given or he's not paid £100 and entered into some kind of like productive transaction or productive enterprise. So neither is the lender's money being put to use for his own benefit, neither is a borrower had the ability to use £100. Rather, just a fictitious liability has been created out of thin air on the borrower for him now to repay the lender. And this is what Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions. And so I just mentioned in brackets, the funds were not earned due to supporting and empowering the borrower, rather by punishing and penalizing the borrower. So this extra £100, the borrower doesn't put the money into any productive use that he's had. It's purely there as a punishment penalty for delaying and seeking an extension. Imam Tabari rahimahullah, the famous and the early exegete of the Quran, he mentions that in the days of Jahiliyyah, a person used to owe a debt to his creditor, then he would say to his creditor, I offer you such and such amount and you give me more time to pay. Again, this idea of seeking extension and paying a premium for extension. These are two examples of the third type of riba we mentioned, which was prevalent, which is this riba would be payable when extension was sought on maturity. But there are examples and narrations for the first two as well. So for example, Imam Razi rahimahullah mentions, as for riba nasi'a, it was a well-known transaction and recognized in the days of Jahiliyyah. They used to give money with a condition that they will charge a particular amount monthly, and the principal will remain due as it is. Then on the maturity date, they demanded the debtor to pay the principal. If he could not pay, they would increase the term and the payable amount. So it was a riba practiced by the people of Jahiliyyah. This clearly shows you this idea of interest being charged on a monthly basis. It wasn't that in the time of the Messenger of Allah or in the times of Jahiliyyah rather, but riba would only be charged when an extension was sought. That was not the only time riba was sought or riba was charged. Rather, riba was also charged when any loan was given. Typically, amount would be payable monthly. And this makes sense. Look, the riba, as even is practiced today, there's many forms that lending can be done based on risk return profile, on the credit worthiness, the kind of like risk appetite of the lenders. All of these factors creates different products in the industry. When different products are created, what changes? You could have payment terms are changed, the rates are changed, maturity is changed, collaterals are changed, security is changed. So just as the dynamics today, they change based on you as a borrower, your credit worthiness and your circumstances and what you're seeking the loan for. Likewise, what the lender, his balance sheet, their strength, their kind of like depth of their books, their terms, their risk appetite, the risk return profile of their investors potentially, all these dynamics have an impact in terms of the loan contract and loan arrangements. So likewise, in earlier times, that would also be part of it. It's not that they only practice one type of loan. There were many types of loans with different types of riba being practiced, as we mentioned. So this was a second type that is narrated by Imam Razi rahimahullah. Imam al-Jassas, he mentions, and the riba which was known to and practiced by the Arabs was that they used to advance loans in the form of dirham or dinar for a certain term with an agreed increase on the amount of the principal advanced. This is very clear in Ahkam al-Quran by Imam Jassas rahimahullah. Again, very early commentator of the Quran in his Ahkam al-Quran, and a very renowned faqih and jurist. He clearly mentions that another type of riba was that an amount was stipulated at the outset. An amount was stipulated at the outset, a premium, riba, stipulated at the outset to charge the borrowers. And this was also known and practiced by the Arabs. Ibn Abi Hatim, again a very famous commentator, he mentions that Sa'id ibn Jubair rahimahullah radiyallahu, he mentions that they used to say that it is all equal, whether we increase the price in the beginning of the sale or we increase at the time of maturity, both are equal. It is this objection which was being referred to in the verse by saying, they say that the sale is very similar to riba, because they used to do the same thing in riba. They used to sometimes inflate the price at the beginning in riba, meaning charge a premium in the beginning, or charge at the end. And so they always used to say, look, what's the difference between what we do in riba and what you're doing in bait, where you're charging a premium at the outset? We do the same thing in riba. Right? We have a markup on the loan, you have a markup on the sale, but in terms of the economics of the transaction, it's the same. And this is one of the key things that people have to understand. That Sharia doesn't just look at economic outcomes. And this is where many people go wrong. That they think that it's only about the substance and what the economics of a transaction is, which is not true at all. That's exactly why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rebuts this kind of idea and says, وَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْءِ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. That the people of Quraysh, they would say, إِنَّمَا الْبَيْءُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَى, that sale is like riba. And of course, they're talking about in terms of the outcome and the economics of it. Look, if you have a markup, we have interest. What's the difference? Or if there's a credit sale with profit, we have a similar arrangement. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is rebutting them and saying, no, Allah is the one who's permitted trade and He's prohibited interest. Why? What's the difference? It's the way things are done. It's the process is different. The process is the focus. The process is the key. That is when you are abiding by a particular framework, which Allah is pleased with. Right? It's not about just the pure economic outcome. It's through the framework which has been ordained and accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Shari'a. You have to conduct your transactions according to that framework. Imam Jassas rahimahullah, again, he mentions, the riba of Jahiliyyah was a loan given for a stipulated period against increase on the principal payable by the borrower. Again, a very clear statement that a stipulated period against increase on the principal. It was, again, a fixed, or it could be a variable rate, but the fact that a loan was given and an interest payment was due. So very clearly we understand and see now from these narrations and from these kinds of quotes in the books of tafsir, that riba in the time of Jahiliyyah was not restricted purely to charging a premium for an extension. Riba was practiced in three ways. A premium interest was charged at the outset. Number two, interest was payable monthly and the principal would be paid at the end. Number three, riba would only be charged when an extension was sought, right? Or a premium would be sought, an extension would be sought, a premium would be paid. So these are the different forms of riba, and there could be more, but this was very commonly practiced in the earlier times, in the pre-Islamic times. Now let's go into looking at the prohibition of riba in the Quran and the sequential revelations. How was riba prohibited, or what are the revelations sequentially when it came down to riba and its prohibition? When was it announced as prohibited clearly for people? And what's the kind of guidance on that? So the first revelation is Surah Al-Rum, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما آتيتم من ربا ليربو في أموال الناس فلا يربو عند الله وما آتيتم من زكاة تريدون وجه الله فأولئك هم المضعفون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that whatever you lend out in usury to gain value through other people's wealth will not increase in Allah's eyes, in God's eyes, right? In the sight of Allah, it will not increase. But whatever you give in charity, in your desire for Allah's approval, will earn multiple rewards. So this is the first revelation where riba is discussed. This was revealed in Makkah. As you know, Surah Rum was also revealed in Makkah. And approximately around the 7th year after prophethood, we could say, that this verse was revealed. Remember, in the Meccan time, in the Meccan period, laws and Islamic laws with regards to mu'amalat, transactions, family matters, social matters, they were hardly being revealed. The Meccan period focused on Tawheed, focused on the Akhirah, focused on Risala. Like in Mecca, the revelation was focused on the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hereafter, and the prophethood. That's what the revelation focused upon, to build the faith of people, to build Iman, right? And to make people aware of the framework and the kind of reality of faith, and to make the faith strong. So the first 13 years, because the Messenger of Allah, he resided in Mecca for 13 years, and then for 10 years in Medina, altogether 23 years. So in the first 13 years, revelation was more or less reflecting these three ideas. So very rare you'd find something to do with law or practice in terms of financial matters or social matters. It was very, very few and far between. But this is one such example where riba is discussed and riba is addressed, but also in the context of Allah, in the context of Tawheed and faith, where this really sets the tone, right, of the entire discourse. Now you're transacting, although you're transacting with people, but your objective and goal, your relationship is vertical, really. The horizontal relationship is determined by the vertical relationship that you have, which is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The horizontal relationship with people, amongst the creation, you're doing that, and you'll only do according to what Allah has permitted, and you'll refrain from what Allah has prohibited. But this verse, there's no real explicit prohibition of riba. The scholars mention that this verse doesn't explicitly prohibit riba, but at the same time, it doesn't ordain or doesn't permit riba in any way, shape, or form. It just emphasizes the idea that riba is a problem. It's not something which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't please Allah. But scholars and the Mufassirun have debated on what it means by riba up here. So the three potential meanings that the Mufassirun mentioned, so Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma and Sayyid ibn Jubair, they mention that this refers to a person who gives a gift wanting more back from the beneficiary. So if you give a gift to somebody and you're seeking more in return when they give you a gift back, when they give something to you and you are seeking something, then what you've given to kind of attract more in return in future from that person, that is a form of riba in this context. Al-Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah, he mentions this verse actually refers to riba, the riba that we know, the interest that we know. And that's the second kind of interpretation. The third is by Sha'bi rahimahullah. He mentions no, this refers to any occasion where you give a gift to a person, not for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather for you to gain materialistically in this world. So you may be giving a gift to attract some favor, to attract some benefit, to get some favorable terms, maybe, like almost a bribe. It's a bribe that's being referred to, and that's also what this verse refers to. So these are the three meanings. But as Imam Qurtubi rahimahullah, he mentioned in his tafsir that there's no harm in taking global meanings, right? There's no harm in taking global meanings when those global meanings are of benefit and use, right? Up here, the global meaning can be taken, that you can consider all three interpretations valid, because all riba can refer to all three. So riba can refer to all three practices here, and all three can equally be prohibited by this verse. But the question then arises, okay, even if we take this idea of that this is riba and refers to interest, why was riba not clearly prohibited in the Meccan period? Because that wasn't the kind of like, it wasn't the space where the Muslims had ability to enact law. They were overpowered by the Quraysh and that economic system. So this was not really passed. Rather, the Meccan period was more about them building their faith. But another lesson that we can draw from here, which is interesting, is that these verses, they somewhat prompt thinking and vision development, because it's prompting Muslims to think that not every form of a financial transaction is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really, when it comes to business, finance, and transactions, we must review that in the lens or in relation to what Allah pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not what works for us. So Allah also has guidance for the economic system. And therefore, it's prompting believers to think that have a vision for a riba-free system. Have a vision for a riba-free economy. Don't think that riba is the way which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this somewhat pushes Muslims to think and start being creative of imagining and envisioning a riba-free economy, a riba-free system. And the final kind of like benefit we can draw from this verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't prohibit riba up here. Look, Allah could have not revealed a verse about riba in Makkah. Allah could have simply suspended and waited for, or could have revealed verses in Madinah al-Munawwara when it came to do with riba, when people could have practiced on avoiding riba, and when the Muslims were in charge of the economic system. Allah could have revealed revelation with regards to riba at that time. However, why was a verse revealed in Makkah about riba? This is a question. So amongst the many reasons, one reason is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with the revelation, is winning the hearts with a first principles approach instead of a legal argument. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, look, if you truly love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you believe in the akhirah, because the verses of revelation in the Meccan period were to do with faith, the akhirah, wanting paradise, wanting to avoid hellfire, wanting to win the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If this is what you want, then you don't need a legal argument. Whatever does not please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you simply stay away. That is enough for you as a Muslim, as a believer. You don't need an explicit prohibition. If your focus is Allah, if your focus is truly Allah and His pleasure, and you're told, فَلَا يَرْبُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, right? And it's zakat, charity, which really is pleasing to Allah. That's all you need to know. That's all that matters. Nothing else matters. Then whatever law comes later on, you're not motivated by law. You're motivated by love. You're motivated by the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is enough for a believer. And somewhat this verse gives this idea that if your heart is made, then you don't need any legal argument. Right? You don't need to be told that X is haram, or X is makruh tahrimi, or X is, Y is prohibited. You don't need any of that. All you need to know is, does this please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? And that is enough for you. That's your compass. You decide and you navigate your life purely on whether this particular practice pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. And so this is a kind of a tawheed-based approach, you could say, and a hubbullah-based approach, where it's about the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the recognition of Allah and what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the aim and goal, and that's all that matters. Now, when it comes to the second revelation, this is where riba is clearly prohibited, and the prohibition of riba descends. This second verse in Surah Al-Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la ta'kulu riba adha'afa mudha'afa wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. That, O you who believe, do not consume interest, doubled and redoubled, be mindful of God so that you may prosper. This verse was revealed after the Battle of Uhud. As you know, the Battle of Uhud takes place in the third year after Hijrah. The Battle of Badr took place in the second year in Ramadan. Uhud takes place in the third year in Shawwal. And it's a reminder to Muslims. Now, why was this verse revealed? So as you know, that the Battle of Uhud was a challenging time where the Muslims were defending Medina. The people from Mecca and the Quraysh had come all the way to Medina to fight. And the Muslims had just gone to the outskirts of Medina, next to the Mount of Uhud. And initially, the Muslims had the upper hand, but then, due to what happened on the battlefield, then many Muslims were injured. Up to 70 Muslims were martyred, and 70 other Muslims were injured. Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. And then this verse is revealed about riba. What's the connection? Imam Razi rahimahullah, he mentions that the reason why this verse was revealed after the Battle of Uhud was that the pagans of Mecca, they had financed this war with riba. This war was financed with riba. And so the kind of message that was given to the Muslims, that don't ever think it's down to means and down to kind of the way you resource your activities and resource your wars that determines the outcomes. That although they finance their war with riba, don't think riba equals positive outcomes, because it doesn't. It never does. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this clear prohibition of riba at that time. And this is the first verse which clearly prohibited the practice of riba. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions that the prohibition of riba was revealed in the third year of Hijrah. So that aligns with what we're reading up here, that this verse could be argued to be the first verse where clearly riba was prohibited and mentioned that it's not permissible to engage in riba practices. Usayrim, a companion, well-known companion, his name was Amr ibn Thabit, and the story of him is amazing. He had riba receivables. Riba was owed to him. So he had lent people money with interest that was due to him. And then he was contemplating that, look, if I accept Islam, then and Islam is saying that you can't receive riba. You can't receive riba. And so what happens is, at that time, when Uhud takes place, he immediately accepts Islam, and he goes into the battlefield and he's martyred. And that's why Usayrim radiallahu anh, Amr ibn Thabit radiallahu anh, he's the only companion, or is famously known as that companion, which he didn't perform a single prayer, and he accepted Islam and he became martyred. That companion, he never performed a single prayer. He accepted Islam, went straight to the Battle of Uhud, and he became martyred. Based on this, Some scholars then mention that actually riba, the verse of riba, was just revealed before Uhud, okay, which is also a possibility. But we know it was revealed in the 30th of Hijrah, at that time, very close to the Battle of Uhud, very close, either before, during, or after the prohibition was revealed. But we know it's in the 30th of Hijrah, as mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, that riba was prohibited. Then there's some words in this verse just worth highlighting. Doubling up here, what does it mean by ad'afa muda'afa? What does that mean? It's just for emphasis. It's not restrictive. Any amount of riba is prohibited. Any amount of riba is prohibited, whether it's simple, whether it's compounded, whether it's fixed, it's all prohibited. The scholars of tafsir mention ad'af refers to the idea of owning capital and its interest due, meaning simple and fixed interest. So you have a fixed amount of interest as a receivable owed to you, and that refers to ad'af, that way it's just doubled. You've simply ask for a return on the amount you've lent out to others. Muda'afa. Some scholars mention that muda'afa refers to the compounding element. So not only is your fixed interest prohibited, but muda'afa, your compounding interest, is also prohibited. That don't have riba, whether it's ad'af or whether it's muda'afa. In any form, all riba is prohibited. So this is a second revelation with regards to riba, which clearly prohibits interest in the 30th of Hijrah. The third revelation is an interesting revelation again, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa, he mentions that فَبِظُلْمٍ مِّنَ الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ طَيِّبَاتٍ أُحِلَّتْ لَهُمْ وَبِصَدِّهِمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ كَثِيرًا وَأَخْذِهِمْ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ وَأَكْلِهِمْ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ وَأَعْتَدْنَا لِلْكَافِرِينَ مِنْهُمْ عَذَابًا أَلِيمًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions that, and this is talking about Banu Israel, that for taking usury, this is specifically on the usury part of it, the verse, the translation is, for taking usury when they had been forbidden to do so, and for wrongfully devouring other people's property. For those of them that reject the truth, we have prepared an agonizing torment. So this verse highlights the wrongdoings of Banu Israel, how they committed oppression, they did dhulm. Allah then prohibited upon them those things which was initially lawful for them became prohibited, and because of their stopping people from the path of Allah, and because they would consume riba, when وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ, they were prohibited from doing so. وَأَكْلِهِمْ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ, and they would also consume people's wealth, devour people's wealth unlawfully through other prohibited transactions. So not only would they do riba, they also engaged in other prohibited transactions. And the scholars mention that riba also fits under وَأَكْلِهِمْ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ. So that's more generic and includes other forms like doing gharar practices, gharar transactions, gambling, rishwa and bribing. All of this comes in أَكْلِهِمْ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ. When was this verse revealed? This was revealed potentially between the third and fifth year of Hijrah. Some scholars, they highlight that this was revealed in the 4th year, when Banu Nadir were exiled from Medina. As you all know, there were 3 tribes of Banu Israel living in Medina, and each one left at a different time. Right? And Banu Nadir, they were sent in exile in the 4th year of Hijrah. Okay. Another thing is, this verse clearly highlights that in the Abrahamic tradition, riba was prohibited. In the Abrahamic tradition, riba was prohibited. Allah tells us clearly, وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ, that they were prohibited. The Banu Israel were prohibited from engaging in riba and receiving riba. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then, what do we learn from this verse? Is an example and a reminder for believers of previous nations and their wrongdoings, that look at the economic history and the outcomes of previous generations. Look at the history. So those of us who invest and trade, we know that we do a fundamental analysis and technical analysis. The technical analysis, we're looking at trends. Right? What is trends? We're looking at how things performed and how things are looking in the markets. Right? That's your technical analysis. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like calling us through technical analysis to look at economic history, to understand how people engaged. What was the outcome? Like, what was the economic practices and what were the outcomes? And that's what this verse calls upon, pondering, reflecting on the practices of previous nations and contemplating that what were the outcomes, not only economically but overall. When we don't do as Allah pleases, what are the outcomes? Allah tells us to reflect on that. The fourth revelation, which is arguably the strongest of revelations when it came to riba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وذروا ما بقي من الربا إن كنتم مؤمنين فإن لم تفعلوا فأذنوا بحرب من الله ورسوله وإن تبتم فلكم رؤوس أموالكم لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون. Allah mentions, O you who have believed, fear Allah and give up what remains due to you of interest if you should be believers. And if you do not, then be informed of a war against you from Allah and His Messenger. If you repent, you may have your principal. Thus you do no wrong, nor are you wronged. This verse was revealed after the conquest of Mecca in Ramadan, 8th year after Hijrah, right? That's when the conquest of Mecca takes place. When the Muslims, they go to Mecca and they conquer and take over Mecca. At that time, about 10,000 Muslims that went from Medina Munawwara, and the tribes that came and accepted Islam altogether, they went to Makkah al-Mukarramah. After the people of Makkah, the Quraysh, they broke the truce that they had signed in Hudaybiyah. So in Hudaybiyah, they had signed a treaty that for 10 years there'll be a cessation of hostilities. And some other clauses, such as if anybody migrates to you, you have to send them back to us. And if anybody comes from your side comes to us, anybody who leaves Medina to come and join the non-Muslims in Makkah, they don't have to be sent back. But anybody who leaves Makkah to come to you, you have to send them back. So on and so forth. There were many terms there, which some of the companions, as we know, objected. And that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed at the time of Hudaybiyah, Inna fatahna laka fatham mubina. Allah reveals the verse of Surah Al-Fath, where Sayyidina Umar and others objected, how can we accept such terms? But then Allah revealed, right, and that this is a clear victory, an open victory. At that time, you can't see a victory. How can this be a victory? We've kind of succumbed and subdued ourselves completely. But it was the Messenger of Allah's understanding and just trusting the divine guidance. That's why it comes down to just trusting Allah's word. So these verses are revealed after the conquest of Makkah. Who were they revealed in regards to? They were revealed, and many a time, look, a verse may be revealed about a certain people, but the message is generic. But verses were typically revealed due to instances and circumstances. But the idea and the message was generic, applicable to everybody and anyone that comes forward and in the future. Right? So this verse is of a similar nature. That it was revealed about Thaqif tribe from Taif. What they wanted was, they wanted to keep the riba receivables, because riba was clearly prohibited, and it was announced that riba is prohibited. The Messenger of Allah announced riba was prohibited at that time as well. Okay. They wanted to keep the riba receivables. Whatever riba was owed to them, whatever interest was owed to them, they wanted to keep that. But they were happy to forego and stop paying riba payables, meaning they get their cake and get to eat it. They get riba paid to them. They don't have to pay riba to anybody else. Right? That's what they wanted to do. And that is when these verses were revealed to them. And Allah warned them that fear Allah and leave what riba is owed to you. Leave it. If you are truly believers, now that you claim you're believers, leave this alone. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا, if you don't do this, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, if you don't do this, then Allah is saying, be ready for, okay, be informed that you've been told of a war, a declaration of war by Allah and His Messenger. They've made a declaration of war if you don't do this. You're informed now. فَأْذَنُوا, take heed, you've been informed. What does this war mean? The scholars mention that this war refers to the breaking of the truce between them and the Muslims. So what does this war refer to? This war refers to, because they have decided not to give up riba. Because they've decided not to give up riba, they've broken the truce, meaning they've clearly committed an act of treason. Right? Because they've disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and are happy to continue with riba. And so that's broken the truth that they've entered upon Islam with, right? And that's why there is a declaration of war. That if you don't do this, there will be war. Like you are now committing this is a criminal case. It's not a civil case. It's a criminal case. You've gone against the law and the state where by this action, where you've now meddled in the economic system. So it's you're doing a macro harm here by continuously dealing with riba. And from this verse, what do we realize? A lesson that we can take, and it's an amazing language where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is declaring war upon them. Yes, one in so far as the kind of like tribe of Thaqif is concerned, we understand this, that and the truce, the breaking of the truce, and therefore physically and going there and taking over the tribe of Thaqif and dealing with this physically, we understand that as a war or as action, right? Punitive action and punitive measures, and even capital proceedings. But what we also gain from here is that riba is a civilizational harm. Riba causes civilizational harm. How do we understand that riba causes civilizational harm from here? That Allah, when do you declare war? Right? Typically, when do you declare war? War is declared against civilizations, against nations, against tribes, against people, against societies. That's when war comes into play. War does not come into play between person to person. And so it's saying, and what we can kind of deduce, or just as an insight we can gain, that riba has a societal harm, a civilizational harm. And that's why war is declared, because this practice that you're doing has a civilizational impact. And therefore there's war on society, civilization against civilization, society upon society, because you are now having a macro harm. So riba is civilizational in its harm and impact. And because Allah is telling them that your actions are breaking a truce with the believers, this is tantamount to treason. And you've done something which has broken your allegiance. It's a matter of national security. Riba for believers is a matter of national security, in that it has a harm which can destabilize the entire region. And we know that anything which destabilizes an entire region, an entire country, is a matter of national security. So riba is a matter of national security. It has and does destabilize an entire economy, entire nation. And that's how serious it is. Hence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He declares war on those who practice riba. Jazakallah khair. This brings us to an end to our discussion on the history of riba. And we'll continue with this series with the next episode, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.